So, picking up here in part 2 of the review of the 50 Years as a Low Country Witch Doctor by J.E. Mcteer. But, he writes here right in the preface, in nights only recently past, the throb of drums out of the swamps on the breezes to float across the farmlands and islands and tell the whole night of this thing that must never be forgotten. Thousands more sat and listened, remembering tales by fathers and grandfathers of spirits, hags, things that will go bump in the night. This was darkness of voodoo, Satanism, the black art, known here as root. So what he's saying is that root, this particular South Carolinian area practice, he's saying right there that this is something that comes right, that is part of Satanism and everything else, which is not true at all. And he talks about witchcraft and the importance of it and how it affects life here in the Bronze Age. I mean, he goes back to all of this, writing these things. I'm not sure for whom's benefit this is, but maybe for his white Christian book readers. But he talks about all these things here, and this again starts to... he talks how people were persecuted just because they were witches and other things, and goes into his family background. So he's jumping around here. He's equating this with this evil practice, yet he was involved in it, his family was involved in it, kind of, and these other people are, and it doesn't make much sense there. So these types of things get very, very confusing. So... But what's interesting is that, and we're always looking for, as a researcher, well, who was really successful? Were there occultists in general? And this is something I constantly search for. Are there occultists that are extremely successful, that can be traced? Can this success be traced back to their occult practices? It's like anything else. I mean, if something works, it works. And I want to know about that. And, of course, we continue to do this. We continue to search for these, and we find nothing whatsoever that anybody was powerful whatsoever. And in modern times, we look at common occultists, particularly the most popular ones, like Aleister Crowley. We look at Anton LaVey. We look at the Michael Aquinos, the common organizations now, and whoever's the head of the Church of Satan or the Golden Dawn now. And we look at the Golden Dawn as well. And the bottom line is that there's a zero record that anything they ever did occult-wise worked for them, in terms of empowering them, making them rich, etc. When you get into all these satanic groups, well, where are their mansions? Where are their beach houses? Where are their hundreds of bimbos? Where are their Ferraris? They're not there. At least the leaders of these organizations don't have. And you have to wonder if you're that, who's empowering what here. But, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But you look at these people, and of course, Aleister Crowley's success rate was less than scientifically significant. So he didn't even have a 5 or 10% success rate. And most of what he did is very, very documented, and was quite a failure in occultism, and just being a semi-rich kid, just played a lot. And none of his books ever sold, and he had the luxury of writing just, crappy poetry, pornography, and a lot of other stuff, and of course none of that was even legal at the time. His homosexuality was illegal in England, and homosexuality was illegal in England. I know it's hard to believe, until 1969, considering kind of what a gay culture that is, with their private schools of segregated youth, who are known to have mass sexualities constantly going on, and all these. You put a bunch of boys together, that's going to happen. So the whole idea is that what works. And we have yet to find any particular people who have been able to do anything that that equates to their magic only. Selling products and making money from selling products about occultism doesn't make you a big occultist or successful. You have to take those products by themselves and apply them somewhere. So, if someone's selling you a real estate seminar and they make all their money from telling you how to do things and they haven't done things themselves, well, that's a real serious problem. So, and throughout the South in particular, where there's this whole community of people, there are these words, these Dr. Bug, Dr. Buzzard, and 5 or 6 other ones that are legends of being so powerful. And, it's hard to believe that people are powerful in general if they're slaves. But here we go again of these constant going back and forth as a serious researcher. Let's say that you were a powerful witch doctor and you killed your master. Somehow the whole family got sick. Well, what do you think them white slave owners are going to do? They're going to come out and they're going to kill all the people that were involved in possibly putting a curse on somebody. So the idea is you just can't go around killing everybody unless you're going to mass kill someone, which is very difficult because they're going to take retribution against you, and there's can't be. This is not a sword and sorcery movie. You're not going to pop up in front of you and form a shield. If you get an evil spirit to attack, infect, and make someone sick and they die and the whole family dies or the master dies, they're going to come after and hang you. So it's not as easy with all these things here of finding out how powerful someone may or may not be. The fact that within a community people are supported, you generally think that this would be the truth, that people would only support somebody because they're getting positive results from it, and there must be something to that. I mean, people are not going to go and keep paying someone unless they're getting results from it, but a lot of these things are very hard to trace here again. So, the big business was hexing and getting hexes removed. And, of course, there was a big business of just going to a witch doctor for health reasons. So that was a big part of what they did as well, which is something that, of course, as we've already mentioned, was very much frowned upon and enforced upon. But he notes a case here of someone that he arrested who he claimed also was one of his teachers. And here, of course, Dr. Buzzard and Dr. Bug and everything else, after this meeting, took him under his wing and through the next few years taught him all the secrets of root and making bags, which is a big part of the root process. And apparently each root man shaped their particular little bag, which basically was just a root in it that was charged with energy. You could say these roots were kind of used like a lot of people would use crystals today. The root itself would have an energy. They would infuse in it more energy. Then they would shape this little pouch that they gave you, and these are usually tiny little bags, and they would come in an odd little shape. And every root man had their own personal shape. And you'd carry this on you, unlike guild bags who are just loaded with different stuff. They just put the spirit into one little root, and you would carry this. And that's a typical bag. The guild power bags are very different than the typical bags, because we put all these energies in there, which are available today. And you got to remember, you couldn't even, I guess in the South you could get crystals, but these people weren't going out spending a lot of money getting stuff. These were things that were available. And he claims in his book here that all the real special roots came from one South Carolinian island where a woman gathered them. And I'm assuming she made a good living selling them to the root men, who probably paid a good price for them. But they all came from one area and one woman, and she would give people the root saying, well, this is the special root for this. So here we go again. It wasn't even picked by the root men themselves. They bought stuff from somebody else who they thought was credible, and only one person. Again, I don't know about that. That seems all very strange here if that's in terms of a fact. But, of course, that's what the root men told the sheriff. I guess that would also keep things in a controllable fashion. If they went after somebody, would say, oh, well, they went after that one person. So, again, you got to understand all the mix of these things. It's like Harry Middleton's, I guess, books, the Hyatt books. Were they telling stories or were they telling truth? I think there's a big mix there. That they were telling a lot of stories with a lot of mixed truths there. And the point is, why were they even doing that and giving out their secrets, and why did this happen? Because it's hard to tell if they were even paid for those in those books. There seems to be not. On other hands, why didn't anybody show up and he had someone who went into the community and got these people? They must have been paying them. Why would you possibly go there to help somebody and talk about your particular cultural background, especially if you're people who are victimized? But he talks about one case with Dr. Bug. And apparently, this was during a draft period. I'm not sure if that was the Vietnam War or whatever. But Dr. Bugs, everyone that went for a physical, when they were drafted, was rejected. That was a Dr. Bud's client. And of course, here we go again. We're able to trace it. That's why you keep quiet and shut up. But this is a community thing. I'm sure he had informants that he paid for or threatened or did his usual police nonsense. All of them got rejected from the draft. Now, it came out in the actual discussions here that he went to Dr. Bug and found out that each one of these people were given one as a kind of a drink again. And as I said, all these cures or whatever they were here, though I find this to be interesting because he really wasn't treating them for medical conditions. This was technically a spiritual thing, but he was affecting them physically, apparently. I'm not sure how that fell into the practice of medicine here. But apparently, what happened is that he decided it was going to be illegal and harass this guy. So what it came down to, apparently, is that he would give these people potions, and I guess they would drink it just before going in to take their physical. And as such, they had strange physical problems, heart beating fast, all sorts of physical things, which they were then rejected from military service because they weren't fit, because they had these kind of heart problems. And this happened with several people. And it then came to be found out that he had given them liquids to drink before doing this that had a tiny bit of strychnine in it. And apparently this caused the heart to beat. This caused all sorts of problems, which made them sick, but just to the level that it would upset their system, cause all these heart problems for a period of time, which would cause them to be rejected, and then that these would not harm them because nobody was killed by it, which the doctors that found out about this were quite shocked to think, well, how could this person possibly do this without killing people? But apparently no one was ever killed and everyone got out of the draft. Now, what's interesting about this is that, well, that's pretty fascinating because the person obviously knew enough about, can we call this herbalism to some extent? He knew the effect of certain substances on the human bodies, and probably knew several other ones as well. That's very, very interesting. And to give this precise dosage that didn't kill anybody, it just made them sick. So that certainly is a feat unto itself and apparently very illegal. What's interesting is that it wasn't magical in any way. We wouldn't consider this a magical potion. It was, you didn't do a ritual, send certain energy, and for some reason they came up in front of the draft board, which is what would be more magically based, and they would be dismissed from service for some reason. And maybe there was something they found health-wise, but that would be because they're looking at it differently, and you got off because of that, because that's what the magical energies did, not helped in the fact of a chemical substance that creates a particular physical state. It would be a spiritual or magical state that was created either in someone's mind to let you to drop you from the draft, or something came up that magic created and it wasn't from a physical substance. So basically, you couldn't say that Dr. Bug was very powerful. He didn't use magic. He used a substance which was appropriate in that situation. And it did work. And nobody died, even though I guess they got sick. But the word got around, and needless to say, he was found guilty of this. And apparently, and they found a lot of money that he had made from all the people he treated. And apparently, he was sent to prison by Mcteer for, he got 4 years or so for these practices, and then came out and resumed his practice again. And of course, people tended to stay away from any of these types of things. Apparently, there wasn't much emphasis. It was pure magical. The minute it started getting into the physical area, it was an opening where they could jump on these people, in which I guess is potentially dangerous. And now when you start practicing medicine, there becomes all sorts of problems. And I guess, you really can't look the other way when you get into these kind of situations. But that certainly isn't. And of course, he wasn't able to use magic on the court, I guess, to get away with a much lighter sentence. Because here again, things are, when you become so blatant and everybody knows with everything's going on, you're probably going to get a worse sentence than if it was something else. So even if you try and do magic on someone in a situation like that, most likely you're not going to get too great a results. You're too well known. So you're going to be made an example of, and so it's one of the very interesting areas to think about as well. But so, did this person have power? Was he occult powerful? He knew something about chemicals, all right. He knew damn well that if you gave somebody some of these poisons, it would really mess your body up. And that must be something that was used in many areas to fool people or doctors and other situations. So this must have been used deliberately in a whole bunch of areas and something developed by the root men. And apparently there were, areas that these root men controlled. And there's Dr. Bug, which I just mentioned. There's Dr. Hawk, Dr. Snake. You can see how people were named for obvious reasons here. And of course, the famous Dr. Buzzard, whose real name was Stephanie Robinson. And their practices vary depending upon the area of Africa they came from, and they did different practices, and which is very interesting to note. And they had control over every aspect of the life of the people of that village. So they were pretty much the priest, the healer. They did everything, and they even imposed dietary restrictions and what people could eat and not eat. So they were doctors in that particular way as well. So it's very fascinating that this would be the type of, and to the extent that would be offered in these areas. And again, the main conflict comes here, and he writes here, and I quote, "A true witch doctor casts his spells and invokes astral forces to do his bidding. He does not administer medicine. But I knew that some of the, quote, doctors looking for quick cash would give roots for anything, including syphilis, gonorrhea, smallpox, and so on." And he was bent on stopping this practice, and since he claims he had some witchcraft backgrounds, that he knew what he was doing on that level as well. So we don't know if these were herbal cures that they were giving that helped in these situations. I'm assuming it would. They can't be entirely bogus. So they were doing the old way of going after the classical, they did this with all witches throughout Europe as well, is that they were the healers as well. I mean, there's basically a witch doctor, whether it's in Europe or Africa, is not much difference. They're working with spirits. They're generally healers. As well, which give, in this case, he's saying roots and so forth for things that he claims should have been treated by regular doctors. But they were also probably were giving actual herbal treatments here, which is now crossing into an area that is controlled by the medical establishment. And he, as a police, had to clamp down on this, and to take control of his area, had to proclaim himself as this great witch. So after his run-ins with Dr. Buzzard and this kind of diplomatic get-together so he wouldn't be further harassed by the police, and he could still conduct his business with the lack of giving out any kind of medicine, he worked with Mcteer and Mcteer claims that he taught him many things about root work, and that Dr. Buzzard would be happy to do it because he was getting old and he wanted to pass it on to somebody. Why he'd want to pass it on to a white sheriff, I have no idea. It sounds good, especially if you're trying to make a deal with saying, well, I'll teach you all these special things I got from my daddy. And I don't believe that much of that was any good whatsoever. You'd have to be a fool to tell this guy anything of great. And what would he know? Just like Hyatt, the Hyatt books, so you could tell Hyatt anything, and how would he have anything to judge from? He has no background to know if anything he's being told were just not tall tales by the hundreds. And of course, from an occultist point of view, the reason why they're called root workers, because they use these roots which they charge with energy. There was the root itself which vibrated, but they'd put their energy into it, and they'd put a spirit energy into it. And then this root, which of course were readily available and cheap, because you got to remember that's what we're talking about here. You're not going to go out and get a crystal or something that costs a lot of money. You get a relatively inexpensive root. This was charged and then oftentimes placed on a person's property. You'd dig a hole, you'd put it in there. And what was claimed that this would then if it was charged for that, it would negatively affect the person to the point of them feeling pains and burning in their leg and everything else as they walked past where the root was on their property. And so this was very commonly done, a very common problem to affect people. Now, how strong this was or not, we don't know, but people were seeking help for it, so something was going on. And it is interesting to note that one of the formulas to negate this, so that it was producing negative energies, and you could then, because it was oftentimes difficult to find exactly where something was buried, is that you'd put together your own little pouch of root, and you would bury it in your yard to counteract that. And one of the formulas, one of the few that are given in this course, is you get a frog's foot, crushed myrtle leaves, a small portion of gunpowder, dirt from a grave, and some raw lime, and asafoetida, which is a root or herb or whatever. And you'd put this all together in a little bag, and you'd bury that in your yard, and that would counteract the negativity that was there. And, again, a lot of this stuff is covered in the traditional sorcery course, and that's the reason why we call it traditional, because all these really potent, proven formulas are there. But, Dr. Buzzard and Dr. Bug, died relatively soon after the contact, and apparently nobody took up their position in that particular area. So, which I find hard to believe because Mcteer claimed that he was not going to do the main practices for a lot of root work, which is hexing and cursing. So he was left at that, and supposedly both of these people gave him a lot of training. But, this is where the confusing factor comes in this book, is that he talks about, the witch doctor and root men are kind of substitutes for people who can't afford psychiatry. So it gets, first he says there's a lot of power in the magic, then there isn't, then it's just all psychological. He writes here that in the general... So my endeavors were to have them recognize that white witchcraft, if handled properly, could reach and save many citizens who believed in it, to convince them that there was a gap in the medical world and that a poor man's psychiatrist would fill this void, meaning a witch doctor. He's talking about doctors here and how he was trying to talk with them, saying that, this can be a poor man's psychiatrist. This segment of our population did not have the money to hire a professional psychiatrist, even if they would have sought his services. If they could have afforded the fee, one trip to the couch would have disillusioned them. They would sense that this was highly educated man was out of his field when the concern was hexes and how to remove them. So it's a little bit confusing here of what he's saying, is that he was trying to get regular doctors to go in and talk to him. And, possible, I guess, if we had psychiatrists and psychology working with people and they would understand that this would be able to replace the need for witch doctors. But he jumps around here saying he talked to doctors and he talked to them about one of the techniques that he uses. This is why it's so confusing. He talks about talking to doctors and said, some of these doctors who saw and believed in the reverse psychology I used, that he used in helping remove hexes and so forth, that he was using reverse psychology. Again, that doesn't make sense here. We're now giving lectures regularly on this subject. Of course, they did not expect me to teach them the unknown tongue or to give them the secrets of my potions. Because part of the process of charging the root is that a root doctor would prepare the root, get these things together, making a little bag, and during this process, he would be calling down a spirit, and he would basically be doing what Christians do, and that means supposedly talking this kind of psychobabble, where they call it talking in tongues, which is an undiscernible, unknown language, and this, of course, would infuse the root with this spirit energy, and as such, you would have this charged root. That was part of the process of making it. So, the person, first of all, was a person who came from a lineage of empowered occult people. They then deal with spirits, and of course, they were trained in certain things, but as these spirits manifested, they would manifest by them speaking in tongues while preparing the root. So that's another interesting, and I'm not sure I've ever seen that mentioned in other books of how this root work is performed. So they would be drawing spirits into the root, and part of the spiritual drawing would be the speaking in tongues. He also talks about the people who contacted him, especially after he became known, from around the country. Educated people that believed that curses were on them and they were having serious problems, and how so many people were so destroyed by these curses that they were contemplating suicide. and how several people actually did kill themselves. But it just shows you to the extent of the amount of people who believed or actually had curses placed upon them. So it is quite shocking when you think about it, of how prevalent it was, particularly and maybe in that particular area, because people had put things on people commonly. Another interesting occult practice done in this particular tradition is they believed that all the spirits resided and were on the moon, and that the moon was a place where all the spirits lived and where they come from. And this was certainly a place that you didn't want to make contact with, or it would be quite upsetting and disturbing of you. But the use of the moon phases, not so much planetary, because I guess that took too much skill and equipment, but you certainly could work with the moon phases, which is again recommended in the course and talked about of the traditional sorcery course. Again, this is something that was heavily part of their tradition. This is where the spirits that they work so closely with came from, or was heavily connected to in some manner. He also states that the practitioners, guarded their profession zealously, and they wouldn't give out information. Anyone that tried to infringe upon their particular area was warned that they would be a strong curse would be put upon them. And oftentimes, a lot of women would come in and try and open up shop, apparently, and they were chased out because of that. And it took him approximately 15 years to get recognized as a powerful witch doctor in his community, so Mcteer says, even though it appears to be a lot sooner than that. But apparently it took a while, and I don't know if they were watching him or he developed some power or what it is. As he said, it's hard to say in these situations. Another interesting note is he claims that the actual Carolina and Georgian coasts were ruled by African witch doctors, meaning men, and that Louisiana, the women were the dominant leaders in the voodoo cults, and those were the Louisiana and the voodoo cults that were down there were female-based, while in other parts of the South, Carolina and Georgia in particular, they were male-based witch doctors. And, that's interesting to know as well. And they named themselves after bird or beast from which they would draw power from, and that's very interesting as well. So those names were they actually drew spiritual energy from these actual animals that they were named after. So that's very interesting as well. And there were differences, apparently strong differences between the voodoo practice in Louisiana and New Orleans, where a lot of more outrageous practices were used, which was more voodoo-based instead of, again, root-based. Snake worship, animal sacrifices, blood drinking, gree-gree charms, the dancing, the drums, building up into erotic frenzies of passion. These are all part of Louvet's rites, apparently. Marie Louvet, the New Orleans voodoo tradition that she pretty much led there, apparently. And a lot more basic whites participated, apparently, in those particular areas. So there was a very different style there. And, Louisiana isn't very far from the Carolinas and Georgia. He states that here in Carolina it was different. After the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves, no longer did the drum deep in the forest call believers to the ceremonies. He now became a loner, and he had the power that he no longer needed necessarily have these primitive rituals. The root men saw these kind of things as a lot of theatrics, and the power really was more like in the Western tradition of the individual had the power from his connections and his abilities to draw spirits. He also talks about another tradition there, and he calls them tribes or cults. The Yoruba cult, which apparently was settled in that area by High Priest Baba. And this tribe held sacrifices and worship at their shrines. They practiced exorcism and cast spells. Their rituals were more like the Louisianan voodoo than the African witch doctors were familiar with. And of course, we know that this was more of a, I believe, the more Cuban, but this was again another tradition, and apparently they had built a whole little village there that was a copy of where they came from there, and they were interviewed on TV several times. But he's never used the term hoodoo. It's all used as root, or he talks about a particular cult, and he donated his time after retiring from the police department to helping people, and he states here again that, pretty much 90% of the people he dealt with that contacted him were all very poor people that didn't have anything, that were sick or living on that, and I was first designated the poor man psychiatrist. So here we go again with this kind of, we're back to, this is a psychiatry thing. This really isn't about a magic. It's all a mental thing to deal with the kind of poor, stupid people, which he keeps sliding back into here. He goes on to talk about a Dr. E. Fuller Torrey, who works with the National Institute of Mental Health in Rockville, Maryland. His book, Mind Game, tells the psychotherapists what they can learn from true witch doctors. He further recommends the use of true witchcraft doctors by the medical and psychiatric professions to help them with the large increase in patients coming to them who are afflicted with roots and spells. He states that the 20,000 psychiatrists in the U.S. are disproportionately distributed among the upper and middle classes, thus leaving a large segment of the population without help. This, he contends, shows that the use of paraprofessionals is mandatory to meet the people's needs. So what we're saying here again is that both of them apparently are saying, well, because there's poor people, we need to get poor people to take care of them, because the rich people and the middle class, of course, can have psychiatrists, but what do we do about all these poor people who come to them afflicted by spells and curses, or at least they think? So, I read into this as that, what that means is they're saying that all magic is just a mental problem, and that if the psychiatrists were able to, would help people, really, like all doctors who really refuse to help people, it's all about money only, then there wouldn't be a need for these. And I'm going to try and get this doctor's book here and see what he has to say. But here we go again of, well, what are you talking about here? Are you saying spells are real or not? So there's none of the doctors want to treat poor people. What does all this mean? And he further goes on. Of course, you got to remember that this is written in the late 70s. Things are a lot different than they are today. I'm glad to see that more and more doctors are becoming interested in the quick cure used by witch doctors to help their clients. And then he goes in and talks about these doctors who are talking about using these techniques as proper treatments. Can you imagine that today, going around with doctors of psychiatry talking about how they can use witchcraft methods and witch doctor methods to help their mentally ill. I mean, everything now, of course, is shifted to where the money is, and the money is, of course, give them this pill, affect the brain, you drug them out, and you sit them in a corner somewhere. But again, this insinuates that psychiatrists or mental doctors can handle these problems because they are based in the mind and not in reality. So here we go again. What is he saying here? Then he moves away from this, saying that many of the people who seek my help are well educated that come to him. And these are people that have all sorts of problems that they can't figure out why. Why are they having these problems? And they are seeking this. And he spends, apparently the book has an awful lot of filler in it as well. It's not a very long book to begin with. I believe, what is it? About 108 pages. And he goes on to a trial here that happened with a military man, a black military man who went AWOL because his root doctor told him not to go back because he would die. So he's got endless pages here talking about this particular case. I don't think that teaches us anything. There's no techniques. It just shows that the person believed enough in his root doctor that he felt like if he went back to at that particular period of time, that he would die, and he followed that. It just means he just believed strongly in that, but he goes on here for like 10 or 15 pages of this kind of garbage and talks about it. Just a total waste of pages here, looking for something of positive nature in this book in terms of valuable information. It isn't here. What we're trying to figure out is, did this guy really know anything? Were these root men that he worked with in this particular area powerful magically or not? Is there any way of telling? And what did he actually know? And it gets worse as we go on here, and which I'll go into. It's interesting, he cites a case here, but he doesn't say the person's name. He says a black witch doctor on St. Helena Island. Let everyone know that he was the master of the light and would take interested parties to witness it for a fee. He guaranteed its appearance or there would be no charge, which is again interesting. Here was a golden opportunity for make contact with the low country witch doctor, which witnessing the light would be interesting, but my primary interest was in the witch doctor. I'm not sure what that means. Why was he not interested in his power? We arrived at his home at 11 p.m. with a short talk. He led a group to his car, and then he would take everybody from his car. He would drive down this deserted road out in the middle of nowhere. Of course, dark, so you wouldn't know if there's anybody hiding there or anything else. It was eerie, and everyone, including the witch doctor, spoke in subdued voices. He said it was time. It was 11:45 p.m., and he will begin invoking the spirits. Let no one talk, he said. Falling on his knees, he started his invocation, you could call his evocation, in an unknown tongue. Here's that speaking in tongues again. Exactly at midnight, which is suspicious again, because that's that powerful time, he stood up and stated, "It's coming." Our eyes were glued on the road. A glow appeared on the edge of the woods. Then approximately 150 yards from us, the glow became a ball of bright light. It seemed to expand from the size of a basketball to several feet in diameter. In about 2 minutes, it was brilliant, dimmed, and disappeared, and it was over. So it's really hard to say. You take somebody out on a dark country road, you start doing these things, then at exact times, all of a sudden this phenomena is produced, and apparently produced at will. So it seems to me that that is some sort of trick. But this policeman decides to think that this is very impressive. And he goes on to say that he talked with this guy and said, well, I want to become your student. I want you to teach me. And this was his beginning with his involvement with this particular guy. Um, so then he set up and he said he wanted to, and that he believed that African witchcraft is the answer to using the astral and kinetic forces that are out there, because that's what he considered powerful. The sheriff is the astral and kinetic forces, trying to bring it into this modern day ESP terminology of the 70s. So he went to train under this guy, which is interesting. I thought he knew everything by now. He was trained by Buzzard and the other ones, but he wanted to get the training from this particular person to see if he could gain some additional power, I guess. Not really sure why he'd want to train with this person, but night after night I visited him, and he encouraged me and told me that I had some strong forces emanating from my brain. It would take time, he said, but he would develop these forces even to the point of having me project myself into the subconscious mind of those I wanted to affect. I watched him mixing potions, making roots, as he kept up a steady flow of talk in a voice that was almost monotone. So he was almost in a hypnotic thing. And obviously he was doing more than just talking. He was making potions and roots. His eyes never varied when he looked. It never waved or varied when he looked at mine. When will you start showing me the ingredients of the different hex roots and start me on the projection? I asked. You don't know what he said, but you are a good receptacle for witchcraft. How have your dreams been lately? Have you not felt me near in your bedroom? Sheriff, I swear it was true. I could see him at night when I would wake up in a cold sweat, and this person would feel you could feel his presence. You're beginning to he was feeling that I was influenced. Oh, I'm sorry here. This was was not Mcteer who was learning from this person. It was someone else. I misunderstood that trying to go through the book here to do it. This was being related to Mcteer by someone else who claimed that this person was going in their minds and doing all these other things and so forth. So this person actually believed that he was then hexed by this particular person and controlled by them. He was coming to Mcteer to get this removed. And it's interesting that he's using this psychological kind of common method, which, is important. It's something that I am starting to do myself now to make sure when we do rituals for people that they believe in the process of what's going on and not give power to these to the curses that are on them from others or others in general. You have to understand that you're with the best, the finest, and the most professional people that know what they're doing, and that if you give credit to these low-level, untrained, bubblicious idiots, that you are empowering their spells against you and not freeing yourself. So he talks with him and he says, "Do you believe I can cure you of this hex? If anyone can, I believe you can," he says. "Will you follow my instructions to the letter and take the exorcism I will give, I have to put in your thoughts? I have nothing to lose, yes, anything. First, you will give up smoking marijuana," the sheriff said. "I only used it for a little while under the black spell. Apparently, do you know that I cannot enter your subconscious if you have drugs in you? I guess it's a way to stop the attacks. Everyone out there, smoke a little grass, then you can't be affected." So this will take some time due to the depths of the hex on you, but I will now take you to my altar and give you immediate protection against any astral projection, and I will tell you that and I will tell you that to do what to do if he appears in your bedroom again, because this is what was happening. He was projecting himself there, apparently, and affecting him. I can remove a spell from the average person who seeks my help in approximately 1 hour, is what the Mcteer is saying. So this is what the psychological thing he is doing here. And that's important to know as well. So we're coming to the end of part 2 here. I'll pick this up and go into you. He describes what his particular method was here, and of course he gives a method here which I don't think is much different, even though then he backtracks and says that he won't tell anybody any secrets, but I'll go into all that in part 3.